Hello, good morning. Good morning. This is April 21st. And I, like you, I'm sure just heard the announcements either through Mr. Turner or through the news that this is us for the rest of the year. And the rest of the year is May 13th. What will next year's school look like? I don't know. You know, and it's a tremendous lot of inconvenience to our lives, particularly to you all, because you all are young people. But you have to weigh things against the big picture. Um, Number one, I mean, this is necessary to do to prevent the spread of this disease, to which we still have no immunity. Um, and a disease to which, if you carelessly contract, then you risk the passage of it to a member of your family who may not be as physically fit or resilient as you are, and that could have serious consequences. The other thing is, once again, I mean, it really is. You really do have to look at the big picture. I just think of things like, for example, uh, in World War II, people in London hunkering down in bomb shelters in the subways during the Blitz. Or I was watching a documentary on World War II yesterday about the war in the Pacific, the so-called island hopping campaign, and how for example, on the island of Guam, um, beautiful tropical island that was an American possession before the war. The Japanese took it over, and the Americans' military forces took it back. But to take it back, they had to torch it, from the Japanese. Now, the thing is, what about the people who lived on that island? That was their home. They're in a war zone. So do we have to endure that? No, we don't. Um, and I do believe that one day our life will get back to normal, get back to something like normal. There'll be concerts again, and there'll be athletic events again. There'll be getting to go to theaters again, to hang out at large festivals again. I think all that's going to come back. And for now, we got to hang on. All right, so let's talk about, like I said, I promised you I wanted to talk today about this. Now, yesterday we went over this and this, the context and the thesis, which as you write your paper, remember that'll be in your first paragraph. And I really, 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 really think you should label those things. Make it as easy as possible for the reader, and not just me, the guy who's going to get it. Today we're going to focus on this because right here, the documents. You see that? Yes, the documents. Okay. I wish I had better graphics, guys. I really do. But yeah, there are only 5 documents, but unlike the old DBQ, which I easily preferred, unlike the old DBQ where you would only get 3 points, here you can get a total of 5 points, which is half of the value of this entire test. And so, yeah, we have to focus on the documents. And the old rule still applies. Whatever they ask you to do, overdo it. Do more than they ask you to do, if at all possible. Like, for example, let's begin with this first column here where it says describes. You will get 1 point out of the 10 if you describe the content of at least 2 documents. What does that mean? Basically, it means you would say document 1 says this and document 2 says that. But point. Don't do that. You know, what you should aim to do is to use a description of your document. Right now, let's look at this where it says describe. Let's see, it says, yeah, supports. I'm sorry. Supports. Now, look what it says here in this part right here. It says supports an argument in response to the prompt using at least 2 or 4 documents. Once again, what does that mean? It means that in your discussion and in this new format with only 5 documents, I think you'll have, of course, the first document, 1 paragraph, and then when you talk about the documents normally will take 2 different sides, 2 different viewpoints, 2 different opinions. You'll have 2 paragraphs. And so when you support those documents, and by the way, use all 5. Use all 5 of the documents because you could very well misinterpret one. But to support it, once again, means to talk about you've read the document and basically what does this document say, agreeing with or disagreeing with or corroborating. What does it say in relation to your thesis? Okay? And once again, label the documents when you use them. Okay? And so if and what the format will be, there's 5 documents. 2 of the documents will take 1 viewpoint, 3 of the documents will take another viewpoint. And 2 of the documents will agree with each other, and 3 of the documents will agree with each other. You have to read that and figure out which is which. And so, remember that Uncle Tom says, if you support the documents, you also have to explain them or describe them. So, that's getting your points, all your points, the 1 point for describing and 2 points for supporting in one fell swoop. Okay, now to get the max, explain the documents. It says, once again, say explain right there. And we're talking about that. Okay? I hope you have one of these around. So, for 1 or 2 documents, and go for broke, go for all of them. Explain how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation is relevant to an argument. What that means is, once again, who said it, reference who said it, and that just doesn't mean a name. Who is this person? What is their position? Why did he say it? In other words, does he have a bias? Does he or she have a motivation? Are they trying to convince the reader, the listener, of something? Or who are they talking to? Since you only have 5 documents, try to do that for all the documents, all 5, you see, within the same document. All right? Now, So that, like I said, out of this whole assignment, here's half of all the points, 5 of all the points. Yeah. Okay. Uses specific historical evidence beyond what is found in the documents. Okay. And now, but you can get 2 points by doing, I would push in another paragraph and just say, and just highlight, big capital letters, specific outside evidence, specific outside evidence. Write in all capital letters, put it in parentheses, of something and it doesn't even have to be from this point in period in time, but it has to be relevant to the argument. Has to be relevant to the argument. You see, 2 things. Go for 2 if you can. And that's why I teach you all this trivial business. Use Mr. Brain. And then finally, demonstrate. The last point comes from demonstrate complex understanding. Now, the complex understanding point, once again, it actually begins in the thesis. When you write your thesis, your last few words, the last phrase of your thesis allude to the fact that, there is complexity. You know what? Yeah, it's like this, but you know what? It's also another way too. That will help you and help turn the reader onto this. And that's the most common way. Explaining both similarity, the second bullet here. Right there. Explaining both similarity and differences, both continuity and change, or multiple causes, or both causes and effects. Although I still like to do explaining relevant and insightful connections within and across periods. And that's the old synthesis point, which is still allowed. It is still allowed. But basically where you can talk about something like the question that occurred at another point in time. For example, in our women's history question that you wrote the context and the thesis for, what other movements in history where a certain group was discriminated against over a long period of time and suffered indignation, suffered challenges, et cetera, what other examples could you come up with? I'll give you 90 seconds. No, I won't. But come on, think about it. Other groups who have suffered discrimination because of a certain condition. Surely you can come up with some. Groups of people. Yeah. Okay. Have a look at this. Become familiar with this. Know the 10 points that you want to go for. Okay. Now let's talk about our unit on Reformation Wars, and there is, yes. All right. The Reformation Wars on part L here. Reformation Wars in France, really complex things. Henry III was the last of Henry II's sons to wear the French crown. He was assassinated, Henry III was, by the way. At the Peace of Palau in May of 1576, granted the Huguenots almost complete religious and civil freedom, but that was short-lived. The Catholic League in France forced it into this treaty. I do mention something called the Day of Barricades, which was a day when there were barricades thrown up all throughout the city of Paris and all the major cities. Henry plotted and committed the assassinations of the Duke and Cardinal of Guise. He, Henry III, in order to hedge his bets, had to align himself with the Protestant King Henry of Navarre, who was a Calvinist in 1589. Okay, and then Henry III is assassinated, and that leaves the new Henry, Henry IV, who was offered the throne of France under the condition that he accept Roman Catholicism, which he did. He was a politic. He accepted Roman Catholicism. But since he didn't want to desert all of his Calvinist friends, he pushed through the Edict of Nantes. The Edict of Nantes was passed by Henry IV and made France the first nation in Europe to legalize two forms of Christianity within its borders. That's why it's important. It didn't end the hatred between the two groups, obviously. It was a religious truce, but not much more. Later on, several generations forward, Louis XIV is going to revoke the edict, and that is something we'll cover later on. Okay, during this time, Spain was the strongest country in the world, in Europe, much to the fact that it was shipping boatloads of silver from the New World, literally by the ton. Philip II, the Habsburg King of Spain, owned not only Spain, but Austria, Bohemia, Czech Republic, Bohemia, and Hungary. However, the economically active towns of France, England, and the Netherlands had tripled and quadrupled their respective populations, because what we're seeing during this age is that commercial trade is the big mover and shaker of economics and people. So Philip II was efficient at running his government and a patron of the arts, and had spent a lot of money on art, particularly art of the Baroque period. Under Philip, Spain had fended off Islam, defeated the Muslims, the Battle of Lepanto, as it says there, in what was the largest naval battle of the 16th century. Don Juan, the admiral's force, destroyed a Turkish fleet at the Battle of Lepanto. I always like to say the Spanish beat the pants off the Turks at the Battle of Lepanto. This engagement destroyed 1/3 of the Turkish fleet and killed 30,000 Turkish sailors. Spain also put down revolts in Portugal and brought many Portuguese lands in Africa, India, and the Americas under Spanish control. Now, in the Spanish Habsburg Empire, the Netherlands was the richest part of that empire. However, the Netherlands was predominantly Calvinist. Which automatically set them at odds with their Spanish Catholic masters, not to mention the fact that the Dutch didn't like to be ruled by their Spanish Catholic masters. And so what you have here is the beginning of hostilities between the Netherlands and the Spanish Habsburgs who controlled them. William of Orange, who was a powerful Dutch individual, ruler of the Protestant Dutch in the Netherlands, was a politic. However, politic meaning, once again, he put his ambition for gaining the throne above his Catholic concerns. He was Catholic until 1567 when he turned Lutheran. After the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre in France, he became a staunch Calvinist. Why? Religious reasons? I doubt it. Probably because he sensed the opportunity to advance his own career by changing religion. Trust me, it happens all the time. The compromise was when Louis of Nassau, William of Orange, younger brother, I'm correcting here, received a pledge from the Protestants of Netherlands to resist the Council of Trent. Council of Trent was an edict by the Roman Catholic Church. King Philip II, sent the Duke of Alba into Netherlands, put down this revolt. The Council of Troubles, also called the Council of Blood, came to rule the Netherlands, and they ruled the Dutch rather harshly. When I say rather harshly, I mean they were brutal. Counts of Egmont and Hoorn and several thousand suspected heretics in the Netherlands were publicly executed. The Spanish then levied new taxes on the Dutch, the so-called 10th penny, which was a 10% tax, but there was so much resistance to it that it was reduced to a 3% tax. During these years, William of Orange lived in exile in Protestant Germany. This revolt against the Spanish was very popular amongst the Dutch people. And there were several groups that resisted the Spanish. One were known as the Sea Beggars, who were a collection of anti-Spanish, basically guerrillas, thugs, brigands, mainly English, many of them criminals, who captured the port city of Brill. Queen Elizabeth, always the politique, in order to maintain good relationships with the Spanish right now, would not support these so-called sea beggars, because Queen Elizabeth had not really solidified her own authority in her own England, and so she really wasn't too anxious to get into a war with the most powerful country in Europe at the time. The Treaty of Ghent was ravaged in what was called the Spanish Fury. Yes. Okay, the Spanish Fury was basically when the Spanish said, we're going to punish these rebellious Dutch, and they went into certain parts of the Netherlands and pillaged, burned, raped, murdered, in the name of Catholicism. So this atrocity was so vicious that instead of destroying Dutch will, though, it actually unified Dutch opinion against the Spanish Habsburgs. In Leiden, Dutch people actually opened their own dikes. We've watched a lot of Rick Steve. We know that much of the Netherlands is land that has been drained and reclaimed by the ocean, from the ocean. And here the Dutch, man, my head is shiny. And here the Dutch actually poked holes in their dikes to allow the ocean to flood. And that would prevent the Spanish from marching large numbers of soldiers through there. Excuse me. The greatest atrocity committed by the Spanish unpaid mercenaries in Antwerp excuse me, right there. I'm correcting. On November 14, 1576, was called the Spanish Fury. Looting, rape, massacre, we've already talked about this. Not even Don Juan could turn the tide away from an eventual Dutch Protestant victory and an independent Netherlands. Now, the Union of Brussels, which was an agreement of the Dutch to unite across religious lines to fight the Spanish. The Union of Arras, the southern Dutch provinces, who were predominantly Catholic, made sort of a peace with Spain. However, the Union of Utrecht, all this stuff will be, it's just phases, complicated phases. Basically, what was happening here were the Dutch were kicking the Spanish out of the Netherlands. Yeah. I mean, all of this, the Dutch revolted against the Spanish, kicked the Spanish out of the Netherlands to create a state made up of several counties, and the Dutch counties, many of the counties were mostly Protestant, many were Catholic, but they said in order to survive, we have to get along together, we have to tolerate each other's religion, which is why, and we've talked about this before, the Netherlands is one of the most tolerant countries in all of Europe. because, yes, it begins with Catholics and Protestants tolerating each other. They will then also tolerate Jews. They'll become the first country in Europe to accept Jews. And so, yeah. Part P. The Spanish were now defeating the Netherlands for the most part, even though they kept trying to control Holland into the 1580s. William of Orange was assassinated in July of 1584 and succeeded by his son Maurice, Space Cowboy. Philip II now began to meddle more and more directly in the affairs of England and France. In 1596, France and England formally recognized the independence of the Netherlands. Give me another one, please. So England and Spain now would begin I refer to it in your study guide as a chess match, seeing which could outmaneuver the other, basically. And that would eventually end in the decline of Spain as the world's greatest superpower of the day. Now, England had its own. We'll backtrack in England a little bit. After the death of Henry VIII, a young teenage girl named Lady Jane Grey was on the throne of England for 8 days, but because she was not direct descendant, she was removed and beheaded as a teenager in favor of Mary. Mary First, Bloody Mary, etc., the daughter of Henry and Catherine of Aragon. Mary married Philip II of Spain, once again for political reasons. During her reign, Mary I, later called Bloody Mary, had as many Protestant enactments as she could repeal. Several prominent Protestants, John Hooper, Hugh Latimer, Thomas Cranmer, were all executed. They also were joined by several hundred Protestants who were either beheaded or burned at the stake as heretics. Mary died and was replaced by her half-sister, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth I. Sir William Cecil was her advisor. This new Anglican Church of Elizabeth I did not allow extremism. Its primary document, its constitution, was a paper called the 39 Articles. England became a bastion, a strong point of moderate Protestantism. When Elizabeth came to the throne, oddly enough, the majority of England was still Catholic. And so here she is, a Protestant ruling a Catholic country. And so Elizabeth is going to be very selective about which opponents, because Elizabeth will have to dodge suitors, men who want to marry her. She will also have to dodge assassins, men who want to kill her. So one of the greatest problems Elizabeth had to deal with was extremism amongst the Protestants and the Catholics. Elizabeth was probably, once again, the best example of a true politique. She put political ends over religious concerns. She was truly cautious with the Puritans, who were amongst the most fanatical of all the Protestants. Puritans were an extreme form of Anglicanism, and the most extreme Puritans became known as Congregationalists. And once again, how do you remember what a Puritan is like? A Puritan's worst nightmare is that somebody somewhere is having fun. And if you understand that, you understand the nature of the Puritans. They were the ones, if you recall, who moved to Massachusetts, Plymouth Rock, they were the so-called Pilgrims. They were also the ones who hung 16 women as witches and had one man pressed to death in the famous Salem witch trials. Yeah, Puritans. But they were not all bad. I mean, for example, John Adams, second president of the United States, was a Puritan. So, as it says there, Elizabeth, had fewer Catholics executed in her long reign, and she reigned for 40-something years, than Mary I had executed Protestants in her shortened Catholic reign. Neither Philip II of Spain nor Elizabeth wanted a confrontation between Spain and England, but there were forces at work which would make that inevitable. Elizabeth had been excommunicated for heresy in 1570 by Pope Pius V, and England had signed a mutual defense pact with France, both of which were doing things that really rubbed Philip II the wrong way. Then there was the matter of Elizabeth English support of pirates, privateers, they were politely called, like John Hawkins and more famously Sir Francis Drake. Yeah, Drake was, he was a pirate. He stole Spanish silver, and that really ground the Spanish the wrong way. Drake also was the first English person to actually circumnavigate the globe. After the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, and I said Mr. Lynn's St. Bartholomew's Day that time, not St. Valentine's Day. Mr. Lynn pointed out the fact that late in my lecture yesterday, I must have been getting delirious, that when I was talking about the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre that happened in France, I said St. Valentine's Day Massacre. In my defense, there actually was a St. Valentine's Day Massacre. It occurred in Chicago. I think in the second decade of the 20th century. I'm sorry, the third decade of the 20th century, where Al Capone had a bunch of his thugs dress up as policemen, round up a rival gang under the ruse that they were being arrested, took them to an alley, lined them up against a wall, and shot them to pieces. And that was called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre because it occurred on February 14th. What we talked about yesterday was the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. So after this massacre in France, Elizabeth and England were the only protectors of Protestantism in France as well as the Netherlands. All right, part F. Elizabeth also had to execute her own cousin, Mary Queen of Scots. Yeah, Mary Queen of Scots, quite interesting woman. She was a Guise, meaning she was French and Catholic, and spent most of her life in Catholic France. Mary's husband had been murdered, and it was suspected that Mary probably took part in it, was the mastermind. The scandal forced her to abdicate the throne and to give her to her one-year-old son, James VI, who will become not only the next King of Scotland, but later on, this child will become the King of England. He'll become James I of England. Mary was found to be in association with two plots against Elizabeth and was executed. Because of that execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, this was the last possibility of a peaceful return to Catholicism, to the English throne. Pope Sixtus V, don't you love that name, Sixtus V, began to publicly support a Spanish conquest of England. Yeah. And for Philip II, having the Pope say, hey, you should do that, that was appealing. Performing an act for the papacy. Oh, yeah, and if you conquer England, you get England. Part G. One of the most important sea battles of history was the defeat of the Spanish Armada. The Spanish Armada was this ginormous collection of warships that were supposed to invade England. And just like the Nazis in World War II or Napoleon in the 19th century, had the Spanish been able to land that invasion fleet on the shores of England, they would have done the deed. They would have taken England. England did not have a standing army at the time. And so what happened to it? What happened to the invasion fleet? Well, two things. Sir Francis Drake, he was very capable commander of the smaller, lighter English ships. And also the invasion fleet ran into a wicked North Sea storm. wrecked a tremendous lot of them. And so you have all these Spanish soldiers washing up on the shores of Scotland. And the Scottish people were more than happy to take these soldiers, strip them of anything that had a value, and then dispose of the bodies. But anyway, I mean, and basically that's what happened. I don't want to spend, modern European history really doesn't talk a whole lot about battles. But yeah, the Spanish Armada was defeated by clever English naval tactics and also by the weather. Yeah. The importance of the Spanish Armada, though, is critical, and that is, after the Spanish Armada, the #1 naval power in the world from 1588 to 1942 is the English. And that's worth remembering. Yeah, the #1 naval power in the world is the English from now on 1588 to 1942. So, Spain never fully recovered from this defeat. It was overtaken by England on the seas and by France as the dominant land power in Europe. And Spain will relatively quickly transition into a third-rate power and eventually into an also-ran. So, back to the matter at hand. The 30 Years' War that took place in the Holy Roman Empire was the most destructive of all the religious wars. I should have got more. But I'm going to make it. What we now call modern-day Germany at the time was made up of about 160 semi-independent city-states. These states were independent of each other, and also weak and disunited. Germany had always been a pathway for merchants and trade routes that crisscrossed Germany, and with that greed over that trade and the subsequent taxes. Population of Germany was about equally divided between Protestants who lived in the northern part of Germany and Catholics who lived in the southern part of Germany. Lutherans were more successful at worshiping and existing in Catholic lands than Catholics were in Lutheran lands. You say, what does that mean? Well, basically it means that the Catholics actually tolerated the Protestants better than the Protestants tolerated the Catholics in northern Germany. Strife grew between the liberal and conservative Lutherans, as well as between the Lutherans and the Calvinists. Calvinism gained a political edge when Frederick III converted to Calvinism and became the Elector Palatine in the Holy Roman Empire. Lutherans feared the Calvinists almost as much as they did Catholics. Now, here's what you need to know. There are 4 periods of the 30 Years' War: the Bohemian period, Danish period, Swedish period, and the Swedish-French period. Yeah, and the Swedish-French period. To be real honest, the Holy Roman Empire wins the first round and the second round, and then the Protestants win the third and fourth round. The Bohemian War began when Frederick III revoked freedom for Protestants. And they got together. We've talked a little bit about this before. So Frederick III had sent a bunch of emissaries down to the city of Prague, where they had a meeting in this tall building, about 6 stories high. And they were arguing, and during the argument, they took the representatives of the Catholic representatives and threw them out the window. They fell several stories into a pile of horse poop, manure, which ironically saved their lives. So that is called the Defenestration of Prague. Defenestration of Prague. What began as a revolt against an unpopular king quickly escalated into an international war. Spain sent troops to help Ferdinand III. Ferdinand's army under General Tilly routed Frederick's soldiers at the Battle of White Mountain, so round 1 to the Catholics. The war then spread into Bavaria, southern Germany. Denmark's King Christian IV, who was Protestant, with encouragement from England, and oddly enough, France. And the Netherlands pushed the war to northern Germany. Ferdinand, however, was so successful he could issue the Edict of Restitution in 1629, which he would reaffirm Catholic guarantees noted in the Peace of Augsburg. This new edict, however, polarized and galvanized the opposition of the Habsburgs and united the Protestants. What does that all mean? It means that, yes, even though the Protestant forces lost, the Danes lost, that this loss actually united Protestants. And also note that in this war, France, who at the time is being ruled by a cardinal, a member of the Pope's hierarchy, actually allies with the Protestants to fight other Catholics. So once again, a Catholic country allies itself, a Catholic country being France, allies itself with Protestants to fight against the forces of the Holy Roman Empire and the Roman Catholic Church. This is pure politics. Okay. In the Swedish period, Gustavus Adolphus, not Gustavus Vasa, of Sweden became the new leader of Protestantism. He won a victory at Brightonfield in 1630. He brought these new successful tactics of using both artillery and cavalry charges, dumping artillery fire on the opposition and running through them with cavalry. Gustavus Adolphus, though, died in a battle with Wallenstein's Catholic forces. Wallenstein, though, this guy Wallenstein, he's a general for the Catholics. He was such a jerk, nobody liked him, that he actually was assassinated by his own people. Greed and political gain were the real forces at work in the 30 Years' War. So, yes, by the way, Mr. Lynn mentioned the fact that historians are not good at math. 100 Years' War, 30 Years' War. Well, the 30 Years' War goes from 1618 to 1648. So there, math guy, get off me. The Peace of Prague was not universally supported. Sweden, who continued to receive support from France, pressed on for war. And France, in the fourth phase, the so-called Swedish-French phase, really kicks in. This last phase of the war, which lasted 15 years, was the most destructive. Swedish, French, and Spanish soldiers used Germany as a battleground. And they marched up and down Germany, looting Germany, killing, pillaging. By the time the peace talks began in 1644 in Westphalia, 1/3 of the German population had died in the war. Say again. By the time the peace talks began in 1644 in Westphalia, 1/3 of the German population had died in the 15 years of the phase of that war, which is really incredible when you think about 1/3, 1 out of every 3 people. World War II, Russia lost 1 out of 7 of its population, and everybody just thought that was catastrophically high. Well, in World War II, they had like bombs and stuff like that blew up lots of people at a time, machine guns, whatever. Well, this war didn't have bombs and things like that. In this war, most of those German civilians who died probably looked into the face of the person that killed them. Wrap your head around that, yes. The 30 Years' War has been called the worst catastrophe since the Black Plague of the 14th century. All right. The Treaty of Westphalia brought the 30 Years' War to an end. Okay. Peace is always more important. The Treaty of Westphalia, 1648. It reaffirmed the premise that each region of Germany's rulers would determine their religion. It also gave Calvinists their recognition in Germany. The Swiss Confederacy, meaning Switzerland was recognized as a country. The United Provinces of Holland, also recognized as a country. And France and Sweden continued to meddle in German affairs. France and Spain remained at war. France was Europe's most dominant power, and Habsburg power continued to decline. This treaty, though, will perpetuate German weakness and disunity into the modern period. Once again, remember, there is no such thing as Germany as a country until 1873, the end of the Franco-Prussian War. Well, we're at 45 minutes. I think it's good. We'll begin our new unit, which will be on England and France developed governments. I'll have to look into that. I'll put your next unit on your study guide. On your assignment for tomorrow. And so, yeah, please keep paying attention to this. Memorize this, how to get the points, 10 points, as opposed to the good old days when there were just 7. And yeah, I think we'll close out there for today. And I will talk to you tomorrow. Please feel free to write in your comments. Please feel free to ask any questions. And so, yeah, I will see you tomorrow.